The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the corner office on the 42nd floor, each drop a reminder of the storm brewing both outside and within the corporate headquarters of Meridian Industries. Marcus Chin sat behind his mahogany desk, fingers steepled, watching the city below through the gray veil of weather. At 35, he had climbed faster than anyone in the company's history, and today he would learn why. The door opened without a knock. Victoria Sterling entered with the confidence of someone who owned not just the building, but the very air within it. As CEO of Meridian Industries, she commanded respect through presence alone, tall, impeccably dressed, with silver hair that spoke of wisdom rather than age. She moved with the calculated grace of a predator who had long since mastered her domain. "Marcus," she said, settling into the leather chair across from his desk. 23 successful negotiations in 2 years. 14 major client acquisitions. 3 hostile takeover defenses that saved this company billions. You've exceeded every expectation. Marcus remained silent, understanding that silence often revealed more than words ever could. Victoria smiled, not warmly, but with recognition. "You're wondering why I'm here instead of celebrating your promotion to senior vice president with champagne and empty congratulations." She leaned forward slightly. "Because what you've accomplished through instinct, you could multiply tenfold through understanding." "Understanding of what?" "Power. Real power. Not the kind they teach in business schools with their ethical frameworks and collaborative leadership models. The kind that built empires and toppled kingdoms." Victoria's eyes held the glint of someone about to reveal ancient secrets. Niccolò Machiavelli died 500 years ago, but his insights into human nature remain as relevant today as they were in Renaissance Italy. Perhaps more so. Marcus had heard of Machiavelli, of course. The prince. The reputation for ruthlessness. But he sensed Victoria was about to take him far beyond surface-level knowledge. "Tell me, Marcus, when you secured the Hartwell contract last month, the one everyone said was impossible, how did you do it?" Marcus recalled the moment clearly. James Hartwell, CEO of a pharmaceutical giant, had been courted by every major consulting firm in the city. The contract was worth $50 million over 3 years, and Hartwell had seemed completely uninterested in Meridian's proposal. "I researched him thoroughly. Discovered he was passionate about environmental conservation, had quietly donated millions to wildlife preservation. During our final meeting, I didn't push our standard efficiency pitch. Instead, I presented a modified proposal showing how our systems could reduce his company's carbon footprint by 30% while maintaining profitability. And he signed the same day." Victoria nodded approvingly. "You identified his true motivation and aligned your offer accordingly. Classic Machiavellian principle, understand what truly drives people, not what they claim drives them. But you did it instinctively. Imagine what you could accomplish if you understood the complete framework." The rain intensified, creating a cocoon of sound around their conversation. Victoria reached into her briefcase and withdrew a leather-bound notebook, its edges worn from use. "This contains insights I've gathered over 25 years of building and running organizations. Not the sanitized versions you find in leadership books, but the actual principles that determine who rises and who falls. The knowledge that transforms capable individuals into formidable forces." She placed the notebook on the desk between them. "But before we begin, you need to understand something crucial. These aren't tools for casual use or petty office politics. They're instruments of profound influence that require wisdom and restraint. Used properly, they can help you build something lasting and meaningful. Used carelessly, they can destroy everything you've worked to create." Marcus reached for the notebook, but Victoria's hand intercepted his. "Knowledge changes you. Once you understand how power really operates, you can never return to naive assumptions about fairness or natural justice. Are you prepared for that transformation?" Marcus met her gaze steadily. "I've seen enough to know that naive assumptions don't build billion-dollar companies or protect thousands of jobs. If there's a better way to navigate reality, I want to learn it." Victoria released the notebook. "Then, let's begin with the first principle, the art of strategic perception. Part 1, The Architecture of Influence. Victoria opened the notebook to its first section, revealing pages covered in precise handwriting, diagrams, and margin notes accumulated over decades. Machiavelli's greatest insight wasn't about being cruel or deceptive, those are tools, nothing more. His genius lay in understanding that human behavior follows predictable patterns, and those patterns can be mapped, anticipated, and influenced. She traced a finger along a diagram showing interconnected circles and arrows. Every interaction exists within a web of competing interests, hidden motivations, and unspoken power dynamics. Most people navigate this web blindly, reacting to events as they unfold. The Machiavellian mind sees the entire structure and moves accordingly. Marcus studied the diagram. Like chess, but with psychological elements. Precisely. But, unlike chess, the rules aren't fixed, and the other players often don't realize they're playing. Victoria flipped several pages. Let me share how this applies in practice. She began with a story from her early career, when she was a regional manager for a technology firm facing a hostile takeover. The acquiring company had identified 3 key executives whose support would ensure a smooth transition. They approached each one with substantial financial incentives to remain loyal during the acquisition. The conventional response would have been to match their offers or appeal to company loyalty. Instead, I spent 2 weeks studying each executive, not their professional history, but their personal psychology and individual circumstances. The first executive, Richard, was nearing retirement and deeply concerned about his legacy. The second, Sarah, was ambitious and frustrated by what she saw as limited advancement opportunities. The third, David, was financially comfortable but craved recognition and respect from industry peers. For Richard, I didn't offer more money. Instead, I presented him with the opportunity to design and implement a transition strategy that would preserve the company culture he had helped build. His name would be permanently associated with the successful preservation of the organization's values during a critical period. For Sarah, I created a new position, Chief Innovation Officer, with direct access to the board and responsibility for developing next-generation products. The role didn't exist before, but it addressed her core desire for meaningful influence. And, for David, I arranged for him to present our counter-proposal to the board of directors, positioning him as the architect of our defense strategy. He received industry recognition as the executive who masterminded one of the year's most successful anti-takeover campaigns. Marcus absorbed the implications. You gave each person what they actually wanted, not what they said they wanted. Exactly. The acquiring company offered universal solutions, money, without understanding individual psychology. They assumed everyone was motivated by the same factors. Victoria turned to a new page. This leads to the first tactical principle, the law of individual psychology. She outlined the principle with clinical precision. Every person operates according to a unique psychological profile that determines their decision-making patterns. Understanding this profile allows you to predict behavior and craft approaches that align with their deepest motivations. The key is recognizing that people rarely understand their own motivations completely. They think they want money, but they actually want security. They think they want promotion, but they actually want recognition. They think they want control, but they actually want freedom from uncertainty. Marcus thought about his recent negotiations. How do you identify someone's true psychological drivers? Victoria smiled with the satisfaction of a master craftsman discussing technique. Observation and strategic questioning. Watch how people respond to different types of pressure and opportunity. Notice what they emphasize when they think no one important is listening. Pay attention to their language patterns, their body language, their choices of example when explaining their positions. She described a systematic approach to psychological assessment that involved 3 phases: observation, hypothesis, and testing. During the observation phase, you gather information about how someone behaves in various situations. In the hypothesis phase, you develop theories about their underlying motivations. In the testing phase, you craft small interactions designed to confirm or refute your theories. For instance, if you suspect someone is driven primarily by status, you might casually mention an opportunity for public recognition and observe their reaction. If they light up and begin asking detailed questions, your hypothesis is likely correct. If they seem indifferent or skeptical, you need to consider other possibilities. The rain outside had settled into a steady rhythm, creating a backdrop for their intensive discussion. Victoria continued with the second principle, the dynamics of social proof. Humans are fundamentally social creatures. We look to others to determine appropriate behavior, especially in uncertain situations. Understanding this allows you to shape perception by controlling the social context people use as reference points. She described how this principle operated in boardroom negotiations. When I need support for a controversial proposal, I don't start by presenting it to the full board. Instead, I identify the 2 or 3 most respected members and gain their support through individual conversations. When I finally present to the full group, I begin by acknowledging these supporters and their contributions to developing the proposal. The psychological effect was powerful. Other board members saw respected colleagues supporting the proposal and unconsciously adjusted their own receptivity. They began looking for reasons to agree rather than reasons to object. The key insight is that people's opinions are heavily influenced by their perception of what other intelligent, successful people believe. By demonstrating that respected individuals support your position, you create a social reality that makes agreement feel natural and opposition feel uncomfortable. Marcus recognized this dynamic from his own experience. Like when you announced my promotion to the executive team before telling me. By the time we spoke, everyone already accepted it as fact. Precisely. I eliminated the uncertainty phase where people might question the decision. Instead of debating whether you deserved promotion, the conversation became about how to ensure your success in the new role. Victoria turned to a section filled with detailed case studies. This brings us to the third principle, the management of information flow. Information, she explained, was perhaps the most undervalued currency in organizational politics. Not just having access to information, but controlling how and when it reached different people could determine the outcome of virtually any situation. Most people think about information in binary terms: you either know something or you don't. But Machiavellian thinking recognizes multiple dimensions: timing, context, source, completeness, and presentation. The same piece of information can have completely different effects depending on how these variables are managed. She shared an example from a merger negotiation several years earlier. Both companies were publicly committed to the deal, but Victoria had discovered that the other company's largest client was considering switching to a competitor. This information could have killed the merger if it became widely known at the wrong time. I had 3 options: reveal the information immediately and risk derailing beneficial negotiations, suppress it completely and risk larger problems later, or manage its revelation strategically. Victoria chose the third option. She quietly shared the information with her counterpart CEO during a private dinner, framing it as a challenge they could address together rather than a deal killer. She also came prepared with a preliminary strategy for retaining the client that would require both companies' resources to implement. By controlling the timing, context, and presentation, I transformed potentially destructive information into a tool for building alliance and demonstrating value. The merger proceeded successfully, and we implemented the client retention strategy, which ultimately strengthened both companies. Marcus was beginning to see how these principles interconnected. Understanding individual psychology allowed you to predict how different people would respond to information. Social dynamics determined how information would spread and influence group opinion. Information flow controlled the timing and context of decision-making. It's like orchestrating a complex musical performance, he observed. You need to understand each instrument, how they interact, and when each part should come in to create the desired overall effect. An excellent analogy. And, like conducting an orchestra, it requires both careful preparation and real-time adaptation. The most detailed plan means nothing if you can't adjust to unexpected developments. Victoria moved to a section labeled Crisis Management and Opportunity Creation. She described how skilled practitioners could actually benefit from crisis situations that devastated less prepared competitors. When faced with unexpected challenges, most people become reactive and defensive. They focus on minimizing damage rather than maximizing opportunity. The Machiavellian mind sees crisis as a moment when normal rules and relationships become fluid, creating possibilities for significant advancement. The key was preparation and perspective. By maintaining detailed understanding of competitive landscapes and relationship dynamics, you could quickly identify which crisis elements were genuinely threatening and which were simply dramatic but manageable. More importantly, you could recognize how crisis conditions created opportunities for moves that would be impossible under normal circumstances. During the 2008 financial crisis, while most companies were focused on survival, we identified 3 smaller competitors whose valuable assets had become severely undervalued. We acquired all 3 at a fraction of their normal cost, gaining critical capabilities and market position that would have taken years to develop internally. Marcus realized this wasn't about being predatory or unethical. You're talking about maintaining strategic clarity when others are overwhelmed by events. Exactly. It's about thinking several moves ahead while others are still processing the current situation. But this requires emotional discipline as much as strategic insight. Victoria turned to what she called the foundation of all Machiavellian practice, self-mastery. You cannot effectively influence others if you cannot control your own responses. Emotional volatility, ego-driven decisions, and personal attachments to specific outcomes all compromise your ability to navigate complex situations effectively. She outlined a framework for developing emotional discipline that began with radical self-honesty. You must accurately assess your own strengths, weaknesses, motivations, and triggers. Most people have massive blind spots about their own psychology. They rationalize weaknesses as strengths and mistake emotional reactions for logical analysis. The process involved regular self-examination, seeking feedback from trusted advisors, and deliberately placing yourself in challenging situations to test your responses. I make it a practice to seek out conversations with people who disagree with me or challenge my assumptions. Not to convince them, but to understand how my positions sound to intelligent critics and to identify areas where my thinking might be incomplete. Marcus found this perspective refreshing after years of corporate environments that discouraged direct criticism. Most executives I know surround themselves with people who agree with them. Which is why most executives make predictable mistakes and miss obvious opportunities. Echo chambers feel comfortable, but they're strategically disastrous. Victoria showed him a detailed framework for building what she called intellectual resistance networks, relationships with people specifically chosen for their ability to challenge your thinking effectively. The goal isn't to find people who oppose you arbitrarily, but individuals who are intelligent, knowledgeable, and psychologically capable of delivering difficult truths. These relationships become invaluable for testing ideas, identifying weaknesses in your reasoning, and understanding how your actions appear to others. As they moved deeper into the first section, Victoria emphasized that Machiavellian tactics were fundamentally about working with reality rather than against it. Idealistic approaches often fail because they assume people will behave according to their stated values and official roles rather than their actual psychology and incentives. Machiavellian thinking accepts people as they are and builds strategies that account for human nature. This didn't mean being cynical or manipulative. Understanding that people are motivated by self-interest doesn't make them bad, it makes them human. The art lies in creating situations where their self-interest aligns with your objectives and broader organizational goals. Marcus was beginning to understand why Victoria had risen so far so quickly. Her success wasn't built on exceptional charisma or technical brilliance, but on systematic understanding of human psychology and organizational dynamics. She could see patterns and possibilities that remained invisible to others. The most powerful practitioners, Victoria explained, develop what I call strategic empathy, the ability to deeply understand other people's perspectives and motivations without becoming emotionally attached to those perspectives. You can understand why someone makes certain decisions without agreeing with those decisions or letting their emotions affect your judgment. This required a delicate balance between human connection and strategic detachment. You need to genuinely care about people's well-being and success while maintaining clear boundaries around your own objectives and decision-making process. It's possible to be both compassionate and strategic, but it requires conscious effort and emotional discipline. As the afternoon progressed, Marcus found himself viewing recent interactions through new lenses. Conversations he had interpreted as simple information exchanges now revealed layers of positioning and influence. Decisions he had seen as straightforward now appeared as complex negotiations between competing interests and hidden agendas.
Victoria noticed his growing awareness. This can be overwhelming initially.
Once you begin seeing these patterns, it's difficult to turn off the analytical process.
But remember that understanding power dynamics doesn't mean you have to participate in them cynically. Knowledge gives you choices.
You can choose to use these insights to build more effective partnerships, to protect yourself and your team from destructive politics, and to create genuine value for all stakeholders. The first section concluded with what Victoria considered the most important principle: long-term thinking. Machiavellian tactics are often associated with short-term manipulation, but the most powerful applications focus on building sustainable advantage over extended periods. This requires patience, consistency, and the wisdom to know when not to use your capabilities. She described leaders who had built decades-long careers by carefully cultivating reputation, systematically developing relationships, and consistently delivering value while gradually expanding their influence and authority.
The most successful practitioners are often perceived as straightforward and trustworthy because they are.
They simply operate from a deeper understanding of human nature and organizational dynamics. As Victoria closed the first section of her notebook, the rain outside had diminished to a gentle pattering against the windows. The storm was passing, but Marcus realized his education was just beginning. What we've covered today represents the foundation: understanding how power and influence actually operate in human organizations. The second section deals with tactical implementation, how to apply these insights in specific situations. The third section addresses the most challenging aspect: maintaining your ethical center while wielding significant influence.
Marcus looked at the remaining sections of the notebook, each as detailed as the first.
He understood now that Victoria wasn't just sharing professional techniques, she was offering him access to a complete framework for understanding and navigating the complex realities of organizational life. "Why are you sharing this with me?" he asked directly. Victoria's expression softened slightly, revealing a glimpse of the person behind the strategic mind. "Because organizations need leaders who understand these realities without being corrupted by them.
Too many capable people fail to reach their potential because they don't understand how power actually operates.
And too many who do understand become cynical manipulators who ultimately damage everything they touch." She stood and moved to the window, watching the city emerge from the gray veil of the departing storm. "You have the intelligence to understand these concepts and the character to use them responsibly.
That combination is rarer than you might think."
Marcus felt the weight of the opportunity being offered to him. This knowledge could transform his effectiveness, but it would also change how he saw the world forever. There would be no returning to simpler assumptions about fairness or natural justice.
"When do we continue?" he asked.
Victoria smiled, the first genuinely warm expression he had seen from her.
"Tomorrow evening. Same time." "And, Marcus?"
"Between now and then, practice observing the principles we discussed today in your normal interactions.
Don't try to implement anything yet.
Just observe.
You'll be amazed by what you begin to notice."
As Victoria gathered her materials and prepared to leave, Marcus remained at the window, watching the sun break through the dissipating clouds. He understood that his education in the realities of power had only just begun, but he also sensed that this knowledge would unlock possibilities he had never imagined. The foundation had been laid.
Tomorrow, he would learn how to build upon it. Part 2, the tactics of strategic action. The next evening brought clear skies and a different energy to Victoria's office.
She had rearranged the furniture, creating a more collaborative workspace with 2 chairs facing a large whiteboard covered in diagrams and flowcharts.
The leather notebook lay open to its second section, filled with tactical frameworks and case studies that promised to transform theoretical understanding into practical capability.
"Tell me what you observed yesterday," Victoria began without preamble. Marcus had spent the day watching his colleagues with new awareness, and the results had been enlightening and somewhat unsettling.
"I noticed patterns I'd never seen before.
During the budget meeting, I realized that Sarah's questions about resource allocation weren't really about efficiency. She was positioning herself as the voice of fiscal responsibility because she knew the board members value that reputation.
And Tom's proposal for the new marketing initiative wasn't primarily about marketing.
He was creating an opportunity to collaborate with the product development team because he wants to be considered for the head of product role when Janet retires next year.
Victoria nodded approvingly.
You're beginning to see the multi-layered nature of organizational communication. What people say and what they're actually trying to accomplish are often quite different.
Now you're ready to learn how to operate effectively within these realities.
She moved to the whiteboard and drew a complex diagram showing interconnected spheres of influence. Today we focus on tactical implementation, how to apply Machiavellian principles to achieve specific objectives while building long-term strategic advantage. We'll cover 5 core tactical areas: alliance building, strategic positioning, information warfare, crisis exploitation, and power consolidation. The term information warfare made Marcus slightly uncomfortable, and Victoria noticed his reaction. I know the language sounds aggressive, but remember that these tactics can be used constructively or destructively. The principles themselves are neutral, their moral value depends entirely on the purposes for which they're employed and the care with which they're implemented. She began with alliance building, which she described as the foundation of all sustained influence.
Most people think of alliances in terms of formal partnerships or obvious mutual benefit arrangements.
Machiavellian alliance building operates at a much more sophisticated level, focusing on the cultivation of multiple types of relationships that can be activated when needed. Victoria outlined 5 categories of strategic relationships: power alliances with individuals who controlled key resources or decisions, information networks with people who had access to valuable intelligence, influence multipliers who could amplify your message to broader audiences, protective relationships with those who could shield you from attacks or criticism, and developmental partnerships with individuals who could help you acquire new capabilities. The key insight is that different relationships serve different purposes, and you need a portfolio approach rather than relying on a small number of close connections. Most people make the mistake of building only with people they naturally like or who are obviously powerful. Strategic alliance building requires you to identify and cultivate relationships based on utility and complementary capabilities. She shared a detailed example from her early career when she was trying to implement a major process change that faced significant resistance from middle management. Rather than fighting the resistance directly or appealing to higher authority, she spent 6 weeks building a network of relationships that would make resistance unsustainable. I identified the 3 informal leaders among the resistant managers, not the people with the highest titles, but those whose opinions carried the most weight with their peers. Instead of trying to convince them directly, I studied their concerns and developed modified implementation approaches that addressed their primary objections while maintaining my core objectives. For the first informal leader, who was concerned about the impact on his team's workload, she created a phased implementation plan that included additional temporary support during the transition period. For the second, who worried about losing his expertise advantage, she designed a role for him as internal trainer for the new processes. For the third, who was skeptical about the long-term benefits, she arranged for him to visit other organizations that had successfully implemented similar changes.
Within a month, all 3 were actively supporting the implementation.
Their support influenced the broader group of managers, and what could have been a prolonged conflict became a collaborative effort that exceeded our original timelines and effectiveness targets. Marcus recognized the sophistication of this approach.
You weren't manipulating them, you were solving their actual problems while achieving your objectives.
Exactly. The best tactical approaches create genuine value for all parties while advancing your strategic goals.
This requires creativity and genuine problem solving rather than simple influence techniques. Victoria moved to the second tactical area: strategic positioning.
Your position within any organization or competitive landscape determines the range of options available to you. Most people accept their positions as fixed, determined by their title, department, or historical relationships.
Machiavellian thinking recognizes that positions can be actively shaped and redefined to create new possibilities.
Strategic positioning involved 3 elements: perception management, role creation, and relationship architecture. Perception management focused on how others understood your capabilities, priorities, and value contribution. Role creation involved identifying gaps in organizational capabilities and positioning yourself to fill them. Relationship architecture meant designing your network of connections to provide maximum strategic advantage. Victoria described how she had transformed her role from regional sales manager to strategic development director without any formal promotion or organizational restructuring. I began by identifying a critical gap in our company's capability. We were excellent at selling existing products but poor at identifying and developing new market opportunities. She had started addressing this gap informally, conducting market research and developing strategic recommendations that she shared with senior leadership. Over time, executives began consulting her on strategic questions that fell outside traditional departmental boundaries. She gradually became the de facto strategic advisor for new market development. Within 18 months, senior leadership created a formal position that matched the role I was already performing. But the key was that I had shaped the role definition based on my capabilities and interests rather than accepting whatever position they might have offered. This required careful balance between taking initiative and respecting organizational boundaries. You have to demonstrate value without appearing to overstep your authority or threaten others' territories. The art lies in making your expanded role feel natural and necessary rather than ambitious or disruptive. Marcus was beginning to understand how Victoria had risen so quickly through seemingly impossible organizational barriers. You created your own advancement path instead of waiting for opportunities to be offered. Precisely. And this brings us to the third tactical area, information management. Victoria moved to a section of the whiteboard covered with flowcharts showing information pathways through organizational structures. We touched on this yesterday, but now we'll explore practical implementation. Information management operated on multiple levels: gathering, analyzing, timing, and deployment. Effective practitioners developed systematic approaches to each area, treating information as a strategic asset that required careful cultivation and deployment. Most people are passive information consumers. They receive whatever information comes to them through normal channels and make decisions based on incomplete or biased data. Strategic information management involves actively seeking out multiple perspectives, identifying gaps in available data, and creating systems for ongoing intelligence gathering. Victoria had developed what she called an information ecology, a network of relationships and processes that provided her with comprehensive understanding of competitive landscapes, organizational dynamics, and emerging trends. This included formal channels like industry reports and financial analyses, but also informal networks that provided insights into competitor strategies, leadership changes, and market developments before they became public knowledge. For example, I maintain relationships with executives at 3 of our main competitors. Not for any unethical purpose, but because industry conversations help me understand market trends and validate our strategic assumptions. I also have connections with several executive recruiters who give me insights into talent movement and organizational changes across our sector. The analytical component involved developing frameworks for evaluating information quality and relevance. Not all information is equally valuable, and timing often determines whether intelligence helps or hurts your position. The key is developing judgment about when to act on information and when to wait for additional data. She described a situation where she had learned about a competitor's plans to acquire one of their major suppliers 6 weeks before the acquisition became public. Rather than reacting immediately, she had used the time to quietly strengthen relationships with alternative suppliers and to position her company as an attractive partner for businesses that might be disrupted by the acquisition. When the acquisition was announced, we were already prepared with alternative supply chains and had established ourselves as the preferred option for several businesses looking to reduce dependence on our competitor. What could have been a significant threat became a competitive advantage because we had time to prepare. Marcus realized this approach required significant patience and discipline. You have to resist the temptation to demonstrate your knowledge or use information for immediate advantage. Exactly. The most valuable information often requires you to wait for the right moment to act. This is where many people fail. They either act too quickly and waste the advantage, or they wait too long and miss the opportunity entirely. Victoria moved to the fourth tactical area, which she had labeled crisis exploitation. This is perhaps the most misunderstood aspect of Machiavellian tactics. It's not about creating crises or taking advantage of others' misfortunes. It's about maintaining strategic clarity during disruptive periods and recognizing opportunities that become available when normal patterns are disrupted. Crisis periods created what Victoria called strategic fluidity, moments when established relationships, processes, and assumptions could be changed more easily than under normal circumstances. The key was preparation and perspective. When crisis hits, most people become reactive and defensive.
They focus entirely on immediate problems and lose sight of long-term objectives. This creates opportunities for those who can maintain broader perspective and strategic thinking.
She shared a detailed case study from a period when their industry faced major regulatory changes that threatened traditional business models. While most companies focused on compliance and damage control, Victoria had identified the regulatory shift as an opportunity to enter new markets that had previously been closed to them. We spent 6 months developing new service offerings that not only complied with the new regulations but actually benefited from them. While our competitors were struggling to adapt their existing operations, we were gaining market share in 3 new sectors. The approach required what she called bifocal thinking, simultaneously addressing immediate challenges while identifying long-term opportunities. You have to solve today's problems competently while positioning yourself to benefit from tomorrow's possibilities. This requires exceptional organizational capabilities and the wisdom to know when to take calculated risks. Marcus was impressed by the sophistication of this thinking. It's like playing chess during an earthquake, you have to respond to changing conditions while advancing your strategic position.
An excellent analogy.
And, like chess during an earthquake, it requires you to have deeply internalized your strategic principles so you can adapt quickly without losing sight of your fundamental objectives.
Victoria moved to the final tactical area, power consolidation.
This is the area where many otherwise skilled practitioners fail because they misunderstand the nature of organizational power. They think of power in terms of formal authority or control over resources, but sustainable power comes from becoming indispensable to others' success. True power consolidation involved creating what Victoria called positive dependency situations where others benefited significantly from your capabilities and relationships. Unlike negative dependency, which relied on fear or scarcity, positive dependency made people want to support your success because it directly enhanced their own. The most powerful people in any organization are those whose success enables others to be successful. They become network centers, connecting people with opportunities, providing resources and capabilities that others need, and serving as bridges between different groups and interests. Victoria had built her influence by systematically developing capabilities that multiple constituencies valued.
Her strategic planning skills helped business unit leaders achieve their objectives.
Her network of relationships provided valuable connections for colleagues seeking partnerships or career opportunities. Her analytical abilities helped senior leadership make better decisions. Over time, I became someone that others actively wanted to see succeed because my success directly contributed to their own. This created a positive cycle where people sought ways to support my objectives because it aligned with their interests. This approach required genuine commitment to others' success rather than simply transactional relationships. You can't fake this kind of value creation. It requires you to genuinely understand what others need and to develop real capabilities that help them achieve their goals. As the evening progressed, Marcus began to understand how these tactical areas interconnected into a comprehensive approach to organizational influence.
Alliance building provided the relationship foundation. Strategic positioning created advantageous circumstances.
Information management enabled informed decision-making. Crisis exploitation capitalized on moments of opportunity.
Power consolidation built sustainable influence.
It's like building a complex machine where each component amplifies the effectiveness of the others, he observed.
Victoria nodded approvingly. And, like any complex system, it requires careful balance and ongoing maintenance. You can't focus exclusively on any one area without compromising the overall effectiveness.
She shared a cautionary example of an executive who had become so focused on information gathering that he neglected relationship building and strategic positioning. Despite having exceptional intelligence about market conditions and competitive activities, he found himself isolated and unable to influence key decisions.
Information without relationships is merely trivia. Relationships without strategic positioning lack leverage. Positioning without crisis readiness creates vulnerability. Each element must be developed in balance with the others.
As they moved into the final portion of the second section, Victoria emphasized the importance of adaptive implementation. These tactical frameworks provide structure for thinking about influence and positioning, but real situations require creative adaptation rather than mechanical application of predetermined techniques. She described how the same principles could be applied in completely different ways depending on organizational culture, industry dynamics, and individual personalities involved. A tactical approach that works perfectly in a hierarchical, traditional organization might fail completely in a collaborative, innovative environment. You have to adapt your methods to the specific context while maintaining consistent strategic objectives. This required what she called tactical empathy, the ability to understand how different approaches would be received by different audiences and to modify your methods accordingly without compromising your goals. For example, in some cultures, direct influence attempts are appreciated as signs of confidence and clarity. In others, the same approaches would be seen as aggressive or disrespectful. The skilled practitioner learns to achieve the same objectives through methods that align with cultural expectations and individual preferences. Marcus was beginning to appreciate the complexity and sophistication required for effective implementation. It's not enough to understand the principles, you have to become skilled at reading situations and adapting your approach in real time.
Exactly. And this brings us to the final element of tactical implementation: systematic learning and improvement.
Victoria showed him a section of her notebook dedicated to after-action analysis and continuous refinement. Every significant interaction provides learning opportunities about what works, what doesn't, and why. Most people don't systematically analyze their successes and failures, so they repeat the same mistakes and fail to build on their achievements. She had developed a framework for evaluating her tactical efforts that included assessment of preparation quality, execution effectiveness, and outcome analysis. She also sought feedback from trusted advisors who could provide external perspective on her approach and results. This isn't about becoming manipulative or calculating in every interaction. It's about becoming more effective at achieving worthy objectives and more skilled at navigating complex organizational realities. As Victoria prepared to close the second section, she addressed what she saw as the most common implementation mistakes. The first was tactical impatience, trying to implement too many approaches simultaneously or expecting immediate results from long-term strategies. The second was insufficient preparation, attempting to influence situations without thoroughly understanding the stakeholders, context, and potential consequences. The third mistake was lack of consistency between tactical methods and personal values. If your tactical approaches conflict with your genuine character and values, you'll appear inauthentic and ultimately undermine your own effectiveness. The most powerful practitioners find ways to achieve their objectives through methods that align with their authentic selves. Marcus realized this was why Victoria had begun by emphasizing self-knowledge and emotional discipline. You can't effectively influence others if you're not clear about your own motivations and boundaries.
Precisely.
And this brings us to tomorrow's discussion, perhaps the most important section of all.
We've covered how power operates and how to build tactical capabilities.
Now we need to address how to wield significant influence while maintaining your integrity and contributing positively to the organizations and people you lead. As Marcus prepared to leave, he felt both excited and slightly overwhelmed by the sophistication of what he was learning. These weren't simple influence techniques or manipulation tactics, they constituted a complete framework for understanding and navigating organizational complexity.
Is it normal to feel somewhat intimidated by these capabilities? He asked.
Victoria's expression became serious.
If you didn't feel that way, I would be concerned about your judgment.
These are powerful tools that can create significant impact, positive or negative. Tomorrow we'll discuss how to ensure that your impact is consistently positive and aligned with worthy objectives. Marcus left the office with his mind buzzing with new possibilities and responsibilities. He understood now that Victoria was offering him access to capabilities that could transform his effectiveness, but also that these capabilities came with corresponding obligations to use them wisely and ethically. The tactical foundation had been established. Tomorrow, he would learn how to build character and wisdom worthy of such capabilities. Part 3, The Ethics of Strategic Power. The final evening found Victoria's office transformed once again, this time arranged for deeper contemplation rather than tactical planning. The lights were dimmed, candles flickered on the side tables, and the atmosphere invited reflection and serious conversation about weighty matters. The leather notebook lay open to its final section, pages that appeared more worn than the others, suggesting frequent consultation and deep consideration. Victoria began without her usual directness, instead standing quietly at the window, looking out at the city lights below. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a gravity that Marcus hadn't heard before.
Power without wisdom is destruction waiting to happen. Intelligence without character is manipulation that ultimately destroys both the practitioner and their targets. Tonight we discuss the most challenging aspect of Machiavellian leadership: how to wield significant influence while remaining worthy of it.
She turned from the window and settled into her chair with the deliberate movements of someone preparing for a profound conversation. Over the past 2 evenings, you've learned how power actually operates and how to build tactical capabilities for influencing complex situations. Now you must grapple with the hardest questions. How do you use these capabilities responsibly? How do you avoid being corrupted by your own effectiveness? And how do you ensure that your influence contributes to something larger and more meaningful than your personal success? Marcus had been anticipating this conversation since their first meeting. The knowledge Victoria had shared was undeniably powerful, but he had also sensed the potential for misuse that came with such understanding. Machiavelli himself struggled with these questions, Victoria continued. He was writing about political realities in a time of constant warfare and betrayal, trying to help leaders maintain stability and protect their people. But his insights have been misappropriated by those who mistake tactical effectiveness for moral justification. She opened the notebook to a page containing what appeared to be a personal mission statement surrounded by detailed notes and revisions. The foundation of ethical power is absolute clarity about your ultimate purpose. Why do you seek influence? What do you hope to accomplish that justifies the responsibility and potential risks that come with significant capability? Victoria shared her own evolution in thinking about these questions. Early in her career, she had been motivated primarily by personal achievement and recognition. Success was its own justification, and she measured herself against other ambitious executives climbing similar ladders. But, as my capabilities grew, I realized that personal success, no matter how impressive, felt hollow if it didn't contribute to something meaningful beyond myself. I began asking different questions. What kind of organization do I want to help build? What kind of impact do I want to have on the people who work with me? What legacy do I want to leave behind? This deeper questioning had led her to develop what she called purpose-driven power, influence exercised in service of objectives that transcended personal advancement. For Victoria, this meant building organizations that created genuine value for all stakeholders while developing people's capabilities and contributing to broader social and economic progress. The key insight is that sustainable power must be grounded in purpose larger than yourself. If your influence is primarily self-serving, you'll eventually face opposition from those who recognize your motivations. But, if you're genuinely committed to creating value for others, people will actively support your success because it enables their own. Marcus found this perspective both inspiring and challenging. But, how do you balance genuine commitment to others with the strategic thinking we've been discussing? Doesn't strategic calculation conflict with authentic care for people? Victoria smiled at the question. This is the paradox that troubles many thoughtful leaders. The resolution comes from understanding that strategic thinking and genuine care aren't opposites, they're complementary when properly applied. Strategic thinking helps you be more effective at achieving caring objectives. She described how understanding psychological motivations helped her provide more meaningful support to her team members. By recognizing what truly drove each person, she could create opportunities and challenges that aligned with their deepest aspirations rather than offering generic benefits or advancement paths. When I understood that Sarah was motivated primarily by professional recognition rather than financial reward, I could structure her projects and performance reviews to maximize the recognition she received for excellent work. This made her more satisfied and motivated while also benefiting the organization through her increased engagement. Similarly, understanding organizational dynamics helped her protect her team from destructive politics and create conditions where they could focus on meaningful work rather than navigating interpersonal conflicts. Strategic awareness isn't about manipulation, it's about working with reality rather than against it. When you understand how things actually work, you can be more effective at creating positive outcomes for everyone involved. Victoria moved to what she considered the central challenge of ethical power: maintaining genuine empathy while exercising strategic influence. This requires what I call compassionate strength, the ability to make difficult decisions and take necessary actions while remaining genuinely concerned about their impact on others. She shared a particularly challenging example from her experience as a divisional president during a period when economic conditions forced significant organizational restructuring. The company needed to reduce costs by 30%, which meant eliminating several hundred positions across multiple departments. The conventional approach would have been to make cuts based purely on financial analysis, eliminate the highest cost positions and departments with the lowest profitability. But I spent 6 weeks developing a more nuanced approach that considered both financial necessities and human impact. Victoria had worked with each department head to identify positions that could be eliminated through retirement packages, voluntary transfers, and role consolidations that minimized involuntary terminations. She had also identified opportunities to retrain people for new roles rather than simply eliminating their positions. The process was more complex and took longer than simple across-the-board cuts, but we achieved the required cost reductions while preserving most jobs and actually improving overall organizational capability. People understood that the decisions were necessary and fairly implemented rather than arbitrary or cruel. Marcus was impressed by the sophistication of this approach. You used strategic thinking to find solutions that served multiple objectives simultaneously. Exactly. And this illustrates a crucial principle: ethical power doesn't mean avoiding difficult decisions or always choosing the path that makes everyone happy. It means making necessary decisions through processes that respect people's dignity and seek outcomes that create the greatest good for all stakeholders. Victoria moved to the second major challenge of ethical power: avoiding corruption through success. As your capabilities grow and you achieve more impressive results, it becomes easy to begin believing that your success justifies increasingly questionable methods. This is where many otherwise good leaders lose their way. She outlined what she called corruption warning signs, patterns of thinking and behavior that indicated someone was beginning to justify unethical actions through their results. These included rationalization of small ethical compromises, increasing isolation from feedback and criticism, growing sense of entitlement to special treatment, and evaluation of people purely in terms of their utility. The insidious nature of this corruption is that it typically develops gradually through seemingly reasonable compromises. You start by bending small rules for good reasons, then find yourself comfortable with larger violations because you've achieved good outcomes. Prevention required systematic safeguards and ongoing self-examination. Victoria had developed a personal practice of regular ethical reflection, including monthly conversations with advisors who were specifically charged with challenging her decisions and pointing out potential ethical blind spots. I also maintain what I call moral anchors, relationships with people whose judgment I respect and whose values I admire. These relationships help me stay grounded in principles that transcend immediate tactical considerations. She also practiced what she called downside thinking, regularly considering how her actions would appear if subjected to public scrutiny or if her motivations were interpreted in the worst possible light. If I wouldn't be comfortable seeing my decisions and methods described on the front page of a newspaper, that's a strong signal that I need to reconsider my approach. Marcus appreciated the practical wisdom of these safeguards. It seems like the key is building systems that force honest self-reflection rather than relying on good intentions. Precisely. Good intentions aren't sufficient when dealing with complex ethical challenges. You need structured approaches that help you maintain clarity about your values and their practical implementation. Victoria moved to the third major challenge: balancing competing stakeholder interests. Real leadership situations rarely involve clear choices between good and evil. More often, you're managing tensions between legitimate but competing interests: shareholders versus employees, short-term stability versus long-term growth, individual achievement versus team success. Effective ethical leadership required developing what Victoria called stakeholder empathy, the ability to genuinely understand and appreciate the legitimate interests of all parties affected by your decisions. This didn't mean trying to please everyone, but it did mean making decisions from a position of comprehensive understanding rather than narrow self-interest. For example, when considering a major technology implementation that would improve efficiency but require significant job changes, I spent time with employees who would be most affected to understand their concerns and perspectives. I also consulted with shareholders about their expectations and with customers about their needs. This comprehensive understanding enabled her to design an implementation approach that addressed the most important concerns of each group while achieving the necessary organizational objectives. The solution wasn't perfect for anyone, but it was acceptable to everyone and achieved our fundamental goals while minimizing negative impact on people's lives. Marcus was beginning to understand how ethical power required much more sophisticated thinking than simple rule following. You're describing leadership as a complex optimization problem where you're trying to maximize value for multiple constituencies simultaneously.
Exactly.
And, like any optimization problem, it requires clear criteria for evaluation and systematic approaches to finding solutions that serve multiple objectives. Victoria moved to what she considered the most advanced aspect of ethical power, creating positive cultural change. The ultimate test of ethical leadership is whether your influence makes the organizations and communities you touch more ethical, more effective, and more humane. This requires you to think beyond your immediate objectives and consider how your methods and examples shape the behavior and values of others. She described how leaders with significant influence inevitably became models for others in their organization. People observed not just their decisions but their methods, their treatment of others, and their response to ethical challenges. Over time, these observations shaped organizational culture in ways that extended far beyond the leader's direct actions. When you demonstrate that strategic thinking can be combined with genuine care for people, you give others permission to be both effective and ethical. When you show that difficult decisions can be made through fair processes, you raise the standard for how power should be exercised throughout the organization. This required what Victoria called values leadership, conscious effort to model the principles and behaviors you wanted to see more widely adopted. It also required patience, since cultural change happened gradually through accumulated examples rather than dramatic gestures. For instance, when facing competitive pressure to compromise on product quality, I could have simply issued directives about maintaining standards. Instead, I used the situation as an opportunity to demonstrate how strategic thinking could identify solutions that maintained quality while addressing competitive concerns. The approach Victoria took involved engaging her team and analyzing the competitive challenge and developing creative responses that actually enhanced their market position while maintaining product excellence. The lesson people learned wasn't just about product quality, it was about approaching challenges with both strategic rigor and ethical commitment. As the evening progressed, Victoria addressed what she saw as the most common misconceptions about ethical power. The first was the belief that ethical leadership required avoiding strategic thinking or political awareness. Being naive about organizational realities doesn't make you more ethical, it often makes you less effective at achieving worthy objectives. The second misconception was that caring about results necessarily conflicted with caring about people. This creates a false dichotomy. The most ethical leaders are often those who are most committed to achieving excellent results through methods that develop people and strengthen organizations. The third misconception was that ethical power meant avoiding all forms of conflict or difficult decisions. Leadership often requires you to make choices that disappoint some people or challenge existing arrangements. The ethical dimension isn't about avoiding conflict but about engaging conflict constructively and fairly. Victoria moved to the final section of her notebook, which contained what she called her leadership principles, guidelines she had developed over decades of experience to help her navigate complex ethical terrain while maintaining strategic effectiveness. The first principle was sustainable value creation, making decisions that created genuine value for all stakeholders over the long term rather than maximizing benefits for any single group in the short term. This required patience and the wisdom to resist pressures for immediate results that compromised long-term sustainability. The second principle was transparent processes, making decisions through methods that could be explained and defended to all affected parties. This didn't mean involving everyone in every decision, but it did mean using consistent criteria and fair procedures that respected people's dignity. The third principle was developmental impact, using her influence in ways that helped others grow in capability and character rather than simply compliance with her directions. This meant creating opportunities for people to exercise judgment, learn from mistakes, and develop their own leadership capabilities. The fourth principle was institutional stewardship, recognizing that her role was temporary and that her responsibility extended to strengthening the organization's long-term capability rather than just achieving short-term objectives under her leadership. Marcus was struck by the sophistication and thoughtfulness of this framework.
These aren't just ethical guidelines, they're strategic principles that would probably lead to better results even from a purely practical standpoint.
That's the paradox of ethical power, Victoria replied. Genuinely ethical approaches often prove to be the most strategically effective over time because they create stronger relationships, better organizational capability, and more sustainable competitive advantages. She described how her commitment to transparent processes had initially been seen as slowing down decision-making, but had ultimately enabled faster implementation because people understood and supported the decisions being made. Similarly, her focus on developmental impact had created stronger teams that could handle more complex challenges with less direct supervision. The key insight is that ethical and strategic thinking aren't in competition, they're different aspects of the same challenge. Both require you to think carefully about consequences, consider multiple perspectives, and find solutions that serve important objectives. As they moved toward the conclusion of their 3-evening journey, Victoria addressed the question that she knew was weighing on Marcus's mind: how to begin integrating these insights into his daily leadership practice. The temptation is to try implementing everything at once, but that's a recipe for overwhelm and inconsistent application. Instead, I recommend focusing on one principle at a time and practicing it until it becomes natural before adding additional elements. She suggested beginning with stakeholder empathy, systematically seeking to understand the perspectives and legitimate interests of all parties affected by his decisions. This would provide a foundation for more sophisticated applications of the other principles. Spend the next month really listening to people, not just their words, but their underlying concerns and aspirations. Try to understand what success looks like from their perspective and how your decisions affect their ability to achieve their objectives. Victoria also recommended developing what she called an ethical board of advisors, relationships with people who could provide honest feedback about his leadership approach and help him maintain clarity about his values and their practical implementation.
These don't need to be formal arrangements.
They can be mentors, colleagues, or even family members who care enough about you to tell you difficult truths when you need to hear them. As the evening drew to a close, Victoria reflected on why she had chosen to share this knowledge with Marcus. These insights took me decades to develop through experience, mistakes, and careful observation. Sharing them doesn't diminish their value, it multiplies it by creating another leader who understands how to wield influence responsibly. She explained that her ultimate objective was to contribute to a new generation of leaders who combine strategic sophistication with ethical commitment. Too many organizations are led by people who are either strategically naive and ineffective or strategically skilled but ethically compromised. We need leaders who can navigate complex realities while maintaining their moral center.
Marcus felt the weight of both opportunity and responsibility.
You're describing a lifetime of learning and development, not just a set of techniques to master.
Exactly. Leadership of this caliber is a practice rather than a destination. You'll continue learning, adapting, and refining your approach throughout your career. But now you have a framework that will accelerate your development and help you avoid some of the most common pitfalls. Victoria closed the notebook and stood, signaling the end of their formal instruction.
But, rather than dismissing him, she moved to her bookshelf and selected several volumes that she handed to Marcus.
Additional perspectives from leaders and thinkers who've grappled with similar challenges.
Not everything will apply directly to your situation, but they'll help you continue developing your understanding and approach. As Marcus prepared to leave, Victoria offered one final reflection: the knowledge you now possess will change how you see organizational life forever. You can't unknow what you've learned about power, influence, and human psychology. Use this knowledge wisely, not just for your own success, but to create organizations and communities worthy of the people who comprise them. Marcus left the office that evening with a profound sense of transformation. Over 3 evenings, Victoria had provided him with access to insights that could fundamentally enhance his effectiveness as a leader. But, more importantly, she had demonstrated how sophisticated strategic thinking could be combined with genuine ethical commitment to create leadership that was both powerful and worthy. The framework was complete. Understanding how power operated, tactical capabilities for implementing influence, and ethical principles for wielding significant capability responsibly. Now came the lifelong practice of integration, refinement, and application in service of objectives worthy of such powerful tools. As Marcus walked through the city streets toward his apartment, he realized that his education in Machiavellian leadership had ended, but his development as an ethical leader of significant capability had just begun. The storm had passed completely, leaving clear skies and infinite possibilities for those wise enough to navigate them skillfully and responsibly. The knowledge Victoria had shared wasn't just about becoming more effective, it was about becoming worthy of effectiveness. And that, Marcus understood, was the true art of strategic power, not just the capability to influence outcomes, but the wisdom to ensure that those outcomes served purposes larger and more meaningful than oneself. In the days and years that followed, Marcus would return repeatedly to the lessons of those 3 transformative evenings. He would make mistakes, learn from them, and gradually develop his own approach to leadership that honored both the strategic insights Victoria had shared and the ethical principles that made such insights worthy of implementation. But, on this night, as he walked through the quiet city streets under clear stars, Marcus carried within him the seeds of a different kind of leadership, one that understood power as responsibility, influence as service, and strategy as the art of creating value for all those touched by one's decisions. The foundation had been laid. The real work was just beginning.